First, let's talk about what we need to learn and where we need to go. The Democratic Party leadership is committed to stopping progressive change, no matter how absolutely necessary or popular. In the debunk with Ben Burgess later, we were going to talk about Joe Biden saying that he would not sign legislation for Medicare for all during a major public health crisis. Now, this is actually very important because if the Democratic Party elite was a non-ideological, malleable thing that was not ensconced in money and not ensconced in a particular ideology, they would support that bill because it's the rational thing to do. If you were just from a real tech wonk place, you would look at this crisis and you would say, clearly, one of the key steps to avert catastrophe is properly insuring every single American. That would be a non-ideological response, in addition to obviously being a moral one. But they are not. They are not. And by the way, this evening we will be streaming Donald Trump's 9 o'clock press conference. Liberals and the PMC will betray us, and the Warren campaign proves that. Now, let's be very clear about this. When this whole debate sparked several months ago, there was a particularly aggravating piece in N+1 that was sort of like, oh, you Bernie people critique the PMC, but chances are you are a PMC yourself if you're writing an article or talking on a podcast. Okay. I mean, look, this is very analogous to you oppose the barbarism of capitalism, but yet you buy things or pay rent. Like, sure, of course. It's not about demonizing a class of people. It's about seriously understanding where they stand ideologically and socially. And if we just look very specifically at Elizabeth Warren and the campaign that she represents, let's be very clear about three things. One, narrow, woke 1990s academic discourses does not motivate anywhere near a majority of the electorate, including in the Democratic Party, and it never will. Number two, the obsession with technocracy and getting things, quote unquote, right does not have anything to do with A, either building a mass movement, or three, quite obviously, serious commitment to that project. Because after the months of we are the most rational, smart, and committed, what did we see? Months of just narcissism and entitlement. And frankly, you can live in narcissism and entitlement if you don't have any skin in the game. And when I say skin in the game, I'm not talking, I want to be, again, I'll be extremely clear, and I'll be very clear editorially. There are absolutely intersecting ways in which people can be mistreated, discriminated against, and so on because of various identities. No question. The base of my politics is about poor and working people. In fact, those people are disproportionately people of color, because the history of this country is an example. But my line is working people, period, regardless of their background. Period, full stop. That's why people in 2016 and folks even in 2020 are much more likely to not be able to have a politics just of personal spite. And I'm talking in the large aggregate sense, okay? People can perform on Twitter. I think there's actually legitimate strategic arguments that need to happen. But people who live on the edge, who actually need to be addressed by a serious economic program, they don't have time to sit back in narcissistic self-indulgence. And certainly, if the shoe was on the other foot, we all know what Sanders and most of his supporters would have done. And that just shows, again, it's not just point scoring. If you really check it out, you'll see that you have to understand the different stakes and the different mentalities that people are coming into fights with. Because if you can check out of a battle for single-payer healthcare, because first it's politically expedient, or you get, psyched out of it by bad press coverage. And then if it devolves several months later into using Republican talking points to discredit it, and then it dissolves even more where prominent people who represent you in various ways or claim to speak on your behalf, and you yourself, of course, go on SNL instead of fighting for the candidate that would give everybody health care if he could, you are showing that you're fundamentally unserious and that you can be fundamentally unserious. And that allows us to understand a really core tension. If more poor folks and young folks voted, Bernie Sanders would win. Now, yes, there's plenty of working class voters that have voted for Joe Biden, and that goes back to another thing about what exactly is appealing here, right? And I think that goes back to, frankly, that Bernie Sanders needed to do some different things drastically from 2016. There's actually some things they did 100% right in 2016, which they should have doubled down on. But whatever way leads to building out this base that is actually rooted in working people is extraordinarily hard. And there's a huge amount riding against it. A lot of it having to do with the fact that a lot of people feel totally crushed for very understandable reasons. And they don't see a viability in politics. But communicating that and getting a coalition that's rooted in that is going to be essential for any left project. It is not, and has never been in any context, driven by people in a liberal professional class. Plenty of people in a liberal professional class can be great and are important and can play significant roles, but it cannot be the energy of a movement. That is proven again and again and again and again. And I defy you to look anywhere in the world where a systemic overhaul was rooted in just that one particular class. And so we need to understand how the left moves well beyond that. The Democratic Party, unfortunately, is of course a swindle. Marx clearly understood that modern democracies were set up to benefit the rich while providing the illusion of democracy. In this country, that manifests very specifically as assaults on voting rights. And in the beginning of our country, limiting voting to white male property owners is proof of how incomplete and, in fact, anti-democratic things were from the beginning. There continues to be voting hurdles. And what is understood now about Marx's view of democracy by both the ultra-left and the right wing was that Marx did not reject democracy. Rather, he called for its expansion. He wanted democracy. He recognized that the appeal to democracy to be used by the ruling class to mask their rule, and the way they fight against it was not to reject democracy, but to demand more of it in every sphere of life. To put simply, to replace the illusion of democracy that benefits the few into the practice of democracy that benefits the many. This means expanding access to the vote, ending the monopoly of the ballot line by the Democratic and GOP elites. And to be very clear, that's a systemic project of actually reforming the system. It's not a protest vote project. I'm not going to spend an extraordinary amount of time on this show at all talking about who to vote for if Joe Biden's the nominee. And I will do one of my classic, a position that I'm sure will piss a lot of people off. If you were in a swing state, I would tell you that I personally would never vote in a way that would facilitate Donald Trump getting reelected president. I would not. I wouldn't do it. I think that there is enough human stake in those margins still there to vote in such a way as to ensure he does not get a second term. On the other hand, I'll tell Democratic concern troll types, I'm not doing the Democratic Party's work for them. These folks are fundamentally opposed to what we want to build as a society. And they have pulled out more stops and acted with more efficacy and strategy to gut a decent human being and generate social democracy than anything they've done in modern politics. People that are known for being shambolic, for negotiating against themselves, for losing, and for, of course, just being, at the end of the day, pawns of big business, have come together to block what is a vital youth-centered movement with the only policy answers to any of the problems we deal with, whether it's climate or corona or just basic human decency. So I'm not going to be fighting for those people who spit on the face and Not just, and I don't mean in a Warren sense. I don't care, okay? That's the part I want to really, if James Carville says mean things about us, so what? Fuck James Carville. I say mean things about him. I'm talking about the policy. I'm talking about Joe Biden could say we're all a bunch of fucking lunatics, but if he was forced because we had the actual Machiavellian power to threaten them sufficiently in political terms, like vote withholding terms. And I don't know if we're there yet. That's a conversation for the postgame. And I mean, again, literally, tactically, I don't know if we're able to do something like that. I don't care if Joe Biden, what he says about us or thinks about us. This isn't a whining self-care thing. This is a policy thing. Understand the distinction. These are open questions. And the closest I can tell you right now is that this show is going to be very interested in what those questions are and how to get better answers. It's not going to be obsessed with hoarding people into Democratic voting. And it's certainly not going to be obsessed with casting pointless protest votes. That will annoy a lot of different people, but we have to be rigorous and intellectually honest. And I will always tell you what I think one should do to the best of my ability. But ultimately, we need to build a left that's actually fit to fight. And we're very far from there. There's a lot of work to do. We must fight to expand democracy against all those who aim to oppress it. Neoliberal, neo-right, neo-authoritarian. But we need to have clear eyes and we need to push back against the illusion and limits that trap democracy and benefit the elites. To build a genuine democracy across all spheres of life, we need to move to a post-capitalist economy. And that needs to be figured out to be messaged and conveyed in a way that folks can understand intuitively and across the board. Not as a counterculture, but as a pre-mainstream culture. And I have no doubt that as hard as it is, and as painful as it is, that if we're strategic, if we're good to each other, and that also the conditions are calling for it. The conditions are calling for it. There, I don't like to look at politics in naturalistic terms at all, but there is some element of if we're in a like if we looked at society as just scientific problems, right? There is a reality of inequality. There is a reality of how growth only benefits a fraction of the population. There's a reality of shrinking prospects. There's a reality of ecological destruction. And the two prime modes that capital manifests to deal with those challenges and govern how things work reinforce and magnify the problem and do not work for an overwhelming majority of human beings. So that means there needs to be a solution there. That literally means there's something in the body politic that needs to be generated. And it is already coming into being to some extent. But we've got a lot more work to do. You just watched a Michael Brooks show video. Subscribe to get them all. Why wouldn't you? Don't be foolish. Click subscribe below and become a patron as well. Patreon.com/TMBS. Thanks, everybody.